Welcome, dear reader, to a story of hidden truths and rediscovered love. Follow Jonathan Harper, a brilliant reproductive specialist whose successful career hides a past full of loss and secrets. As he faces haunting memories and unexpected revelations, his journey reminds us that even the deepest wounds can lead to new beginnings. If you enjoy tales that stir deep emotions and reveal hidden layers of the human spirit, subscribe now to join our community. Now, let's start listening to the story. Jonathan Harper's mornings always began in quiet solitude. In his spacious, yet minimally furnished apartment, light would filter through sheer curtains, revealing shelves lined with medical journals and meticulously organized case files. A renowned reproductive specialist, Jonathan's career had been a testament to dedication, precision, and empathy. Every day, he worked with couples grappling with infertility, a challenge that he met with both technical expertise and gentle compassion. Yet, while his professional life thrived, his personal realm had grown barren. His relationships were sparse, his emotions carefully quarantined after a painful chapter with Emily, his ex-girlfriend, who had left him abruptly years ago. On an unusually chilly afternoon, as Jonathan sifted through a stack of mail that barely disturbed the stillness of his routine, one envelope caught his attention. Its cream-colored paper was embossed with elegant calligraphy, a wedding invitation addressed in his name. Jonathan's initial impulse was to set it aside, to dismiss the interruption to his orderly life. But as his fingers paused on the delicate paper, a name appeared that jolted him from his habitual indifference: Michael Turner. Michael, his best friend since medical school, had always been the outgoing counterbalance to Jonathan's reserved nature. Their friendship, rooted in years of shared late-night study sessions and confessions during hospital shifts, had always been a quiet pillar of support. Yet Jonathan had grown accustomed to keeping the distance. After all, the echo of Emily's departure had taught him to guard his heart. Now, however, Michael's presence in his life was reasserting itself through the unexpected invitation. Reading the inscription again, Jonathan's mind raced with conflicting emotions. The invitation, penned in a refined yet familiar script, hinted at a celebration of life and new beginnings. But underneath that festive promise lay an unsettling twist. Jonathan hadn't known that Michael was engaged. The revelation struck him hard. This was not just another social obligation, but a marker of change in his long quiet world. Curiosity battled with apprehension in his chest, and for a long moment, he found himself rereading the words as if they might divulge a secret. He remembered the last time Michael had confided in him, sharing dreams and worries over late-night coffee. Back then, Jonathan had been absorbed in his work and the safety of his solitary routines. Now, the wedding invitation felt like a portal, a chance to reconnect with a past filled with laughter, shared ambitions, and even a spark of youthful idealism. Yet it also carried the risk of reopening old wounds. The specter of Emily loomed large in his memory, a painful reminder of love lost and decisions made under duress. The invitation's ornate design and carefully chosen words stirred something deep inside him. It wasn't just a call to celebrate Michael's upcoming nuptials. It was a subtle prod to step beyond his self-imposed exile. Jonathan's hands trembled slightly as he traced the embossed letters. He wondered if this day might offer him a path back to a life that once promised connection and warmth, a life that now seemed almost unreachable. In that quiet moment, as dusk crept over the city and his solitude deepened, Jonathan made a decision. He would attend the wedding, not because he was suddenly ready to embrace the world of social pleasantries, but because he sensed that this event might unravel some of the threads of his emotional detachment. Michael's invitation was more than a mere summons to celebrate. It was an invitation to confront the life he had long avoided, a life where past love and forgotten memories might reawaken, for better or worse. As he tucked the invitation carefully into a drawer, Jonathan felt a mix of trepidation and anticipation. The envelope, bearing Michael's name and the promise of change, had set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and the courage to face one's past. That night, as he lay awake in the silence of his bedroom, Jonathan's mind churned with questions. Would the wedding rekindle lost bonds, or reopen old scars? And was he, after all these years, ready to face the bittersweet ghosts of his former life? In the delicate balance between his professional certainty and personal uncertainty, the mysterious invitation shone like a beacon, a call to step beyond the confines of isolation and into a world where the past was never truly forgotten. Little did Jonathan know that accepting this invitation would be the first step toward a journey that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. On the morning of the wedding, a gentle mist enveloped the sprawling estate where Michael's celebration was to take place. Jonathan Harper awoke early, a curious mixture of reluctance and anticipation gnawing in his stomach. The invitation's call had stirred something dormant within him, a desire for connection that had long been buried under layers of work and solitude. Dressed in a carefully chosen suit that he had not worn in years, Jonathan set out, his footsteps echoing on the cobblestone paths leading toward the grand estate. The venue itself was a masterpiece of luxury and tradition. Gleaming marble pillars, lush gardens bursting with vibrant blooms, and sweeping lawns dotted with artfully arranged tables created an atmosphere that was both opulent and inviting. As Jonathan stepped through the ornate entrance, he was greeted by a warm cascade of light filtering through high, arched windows, and the gentle strains of a string quartet that played a timeless melody. Despite his habitual detachment, he couldn't help but be momentarily captivated by the beauty of the setting. Inside the stately hall, conversations mingled with laughter and the clink of fine glassware. Guests in elegant attire moved gracefully among clusters of friends and family, their joy a palpable undercurrent to the celebration. Yet, amid this festive scene, Jonathan felt like a silent observer, a man caught between the world of practiced social rituals and the private fortress of his inner thoughts. He found a quiet corner near a large window, where he could watch the proceedings without being drawn into the crowd. As the day unfolded, Jonathan's mind wandered back to memories of past celebrations, weddings he had attended long ago when his heart had been open and full of hope. Now, those memories seemed both distant and painfully intimate. Each laugh, each exchanged glance among the guests, only amplified the contrast between his current isolation and the vibrant tapestry of human connection that unfolded before him. The lavish decor and joyful chatter were reminders of a life filled with promise, one that he had quietly abandoned. Michael, ever the effervescent spirit, moved through the room with an easy confidence. His bright smile and infectious laughter endeared him to everyone, including Jonathan, who watched him with a bittersweet mix of admiration and envy. Michael's engagement was a symbol of life's forward momentum, a stark reminder to Jonathan that some relationships, no matter how long neglected, could still blossom unexpectedly. Yet, beneath the surface of admiration lay an unspoken fear. What if this celebration marked not only a new beginning for Michael, but also a painful confrontation with his own unresolved past? Throughout the afternoon, Jonathan attempted to mingle. He exchanged polite greetings with distant relatives and even participated in light banter with a few friendly guests. However, every smile and nod was accompanied by an undercurrent of distraction, a quiet internal monologue questioning his place in this jubilant world. The grandeur of the estate, with its elegant design and impeccable service, only served to heighten the disparity between the exuberance around him and the loneliness that had become his constant companion. At one point, as he sipped a glass of champagne by a marble fountain, Jonathan caught himself watching the guests with an almost clinical detachment. He recalled his early days as a doctor, when every challenge was met with methodical precision and emotions were secondary to results. Now, the wedding was transforming into a study in human fragility, the smiles that concealed hidden sorrows, the laughter that masked memories of lost love, and the hopeful glances that dared to dream of new beginnings. Despite his inner reservations, the day carried on, each moment building a sense of inevitable change. As the ceremony was about to begin, Jonathan felt the weight of the moment settle over him. The soft murmur of the guests hushed, and anticipation rippled through the air like electricity before a storm. Standing at the threshold of a ceremony that promised both joy and revelation, Jonathan realized that the wedding was not merely a social obligation. It was an invitation to confront the tangled threads of his past, to witness the merging of lives and secrets he had long tried to forget. With his heart pounding quietly beneath his composed exterior, Jonathan stepped forward into the unfolding celebration, unaware that the day held surprises that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and the possibility of redemption. As the ceremony commenced beneath the shimmering glow of crystal chandeliers and delicate floral arrangements, Jonathan found himself inexplicably drawn to the figure at the center of it all, the bride. She glided down the aisle with an effortless grace that seemed to suspend time, each step measured yet imbued with an air of mystery. Jonathan's gaze, usually so guarded, lingered on her as if the gentle cadence of her walk carried whispers of a long-forgotten melody. There was something strikingly familiar in her presence, an echo of a past he had once cherished. The bride's attire was a vision of timeless elegance, soft lace intricately woven with subtle patterns that hinted at both tradition and modernity. Every movement she made was precise, yet imbued with a natural beauty that commanded attention. Jonathan's eyes traced the delicate arch of her neck, the gentle slope of her shoulders, and finally, the tilt of her chin, a tilt that stirred a vague, unsettling recollection deep within him. It was as if each graceful motion unlocked a hidden memory, one that was as bittersweet as it was unexpected. As the ceremony progressed, Jonathan's thoughts grew increasingly entangled. He had spent years constructing a fortress around his emotions, burying the pain of Emily's departure beneath layers of professional detachment. Yet now, here in the soft light of the reception hall, every subtle nuance of the bride's presence seemed to challenge that carefully maintained distance. Her smile, though demure, resonated with a warmth that was both inviting and disconcerting. Jonathan's mind raced, trying to place the source of the familiarity that tugged at his heart. A peculiar sensation began to build within him, a prickling awareness that something was undeniably amiss. Amid the orchestrated harmony of the wedding, his eyes were drawn to a small, seemingly insignificant detail, a faint scar delicately traced along the upper curve of her hip. It was a mark that, in an instant, shattered the fragile equilibrium of his thoughts. The scar was unmistakable, a tiny line that carried with it an echo of a memory he had long fought to forget. In that brief, suspended moment, Jonathan's heart pounded in his ears, each beat a reminder of the past he had once believed was irretrievably lost. He recalled the day vividly, the moment when fate had intertwined their lives in a rush of passion and sorrow. Emily, the woman he had once loved fiercely, had borne that same scar. It had been the unintended result of an accident, a small but indelible symbol of a time when life was both beautiful and brutally transient. Now, to see that mark on the bride before him was to witness an impossible overlap between his present and a chapter of his past he had desperately tried to close. Confusion and disbelief warred within him. How could it be that the woman standing before him, radiant and poised as the emblem of a new beginning, might be connected to the one who had so unexpectedly vanished from his life? Jonathan's mind spun with questions as he discreetly observed the bride from the fringes of the gathering. Every gesture, every subtle glance exchanged with Michael seemed loaded with unspoken meaning. The realization struck him with a force that left him momentarily speechless. He recognized the scar, and with it, the haunting specter of Emily. In that silent, heart-stopping moment, the boundaries between past and present blurred. Jonathan's carefully constructed world, where every emotion was measured and controlled, began to crumble under the weight of an overwhelming recognition. The bride's every movement, from the soft flutter of her hand to the slight arch of her back, resonated with memories of a love that had once burned bright and fierce, now reduced to fragments of pain and regret. And as the final strains of the ceremony echoed through the hall, Jonathan was left to grapple with a single, shattering truth. The woman before him was not a stranger, but perhaps, in some inexplicable way, the very embodiment of a past he thought was gone forever. In the hushed interlude that followed the ceremony, Jonathan's mind became a whirlwind of memories and emotions. The elegant veneer of the wedding had been punctured by the startling discovery of that one familiar scar, a mark so small yet so potent that it threatened to unravel the carefully guarded tapestry of his past. He recalled the day it had first appeared on Emily's skin, a sharp, unexpected accident during a moment of youthful recklessness, leaving behind a delicate line that would forever symbolize the fragility of their once intimate connection. Now, as he watched the bride's back subtly shift under the weight of the evening's attention, that same scar was a vivid reminder that the past, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of resurfacing when least expected. Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest as he retraced the timeline of his memories. He remembered the gentle touch of Emily's hand, the warmth of her presence on cold nights, and the silent promises exchanged in the quiet of their shared solitude. In the days following her abrupt departure, he had tried to convince himself that the pain was over, that the scar was nothing more than a trivial detail in a long-forgotten chapter. But now, confronted by its undeniable presence on the bride's body, he felt a surge of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. Each detail of the scar resonated with a precision that could only be described as destiny. Its placement was exact, the same spot where he had once cradled her in his arms while watching over her as she received delicate stitches. The memory was vivid, the sterile scent of the hospital, the soft murmur of comforting words, and the unspoken acknowledgement of vulnerability that had connected them in those fragile moments. That mark had been a silent witness to their shared pain and an emblem of the unexpected turns that life had taken. Now, as Jonathan observed the bride from a discreet distance, his mind became a battleground of conflicting feelings. Part of him wanted to believe that he was mistaken, that the scar was merely an unfortunate coincidence. Yet, every fiber of his being resisted such a notion. The emotional intensity of that recollection was too raw, too precise, to be dismissed as chance. In the midst of the elegant festivities, the scar had shattered the facade of normalcy, forcing him to confront the reality that he had long sought to escape. With each passing minute, Jonathan felt the weight of years of silence and suppressed longing pressing upon him. His thoughts raced back to moments when he had imagined a future where reconciliation might mend the broken fragments of their past. Now, the vision of the bride, a woman with the same tender yet resilient mark that had once belonged to Emily, filled him with both awe and despair. It was as if fate had orchestrated this encounter to force him to re-examine the choices he had made, the love he had lost, and the possibility that the life he had built in solitude was but a temporary refuge from the truth. In that charged atmosphere, as the soft hum of conversation and laughter continued unabated around him, Jonathan stood frozen in time. The scar was not just a physical mark. It was a portal to memories laden with both beauty and sorrow. It was a reminder that even the most meticulously arranged lives can be disrupted by the unpredictable hand of fate. And in that moment, as the bride moved gracefully across the room, Jonathan realized that the revelation of the scar had irrevocably changed everything. The past was no longer confined to a distant, painful memory. It had come alive, demanding that he confront a truth he had long denied. After the emotional storm of the ceremony had subsided, the wedding reception began in earnest. A grand affair marked by lavish decor, sumptuous feasts, and music that seemed to animate the very air around the guests. Yet for Jonathan, the celebration was anything but joyful. The revelation of that familiar scar had unsettled him to his core, and as the night unfolded, he found himself adrift in a sea of awkward solitude. The reception hall was bathed in warm, golden light, its high ceilings adorned with shimmering chandeliers and walls draped in rich tapestries. Long tables groaned under the weight of exquisite dishes and fine wines, while laughter and conversation wove a tapestry of shared happiness. But Jonathan felt like an intruder in this idyllic scene, a man whose inner turmoil clashed sharply with the outward merriment of the occasion. Seated at a table with acquaintances and distant relatives, Jonathan attempted to engage in polite conversation. Yet every smile he forced, every nod he gave, was tainted by the relentless echo of that scar and the haunting possibility that the bride might be more than a stranger. His eyes continually darted toward the dance floor and the elegantly arranged seating, searching for clues, for confirmation of a truth he was not ready to accept fully. The festive atmosphere, with its upbeat music and light-hearted banter, only accentuated his inner isolation. Each time he tried to laugh or share a moment of light conversation, a surge of doubt and melancholy overtook him, as though he were caught between two worlds, the bright present and a shadowed past. Jonathan found refuge in the quiet corners of the hall, standing near a marble column where the soft glow of candlelight offered a semblance of privacy. Here, he allowed himself to observe without being observed, listening to the jubilant toasts and the gentle clinking of glasses, all the while feeling increasingly detached from the revelry. Every so often, his gaze would drift to the bride and Michael, whose interactions were filled with a natural ease that only deepened his sense of alienation. The joyful expressions on their faces seemed to mock the turmoil raging within him. He could sense the undercurrents of celebration, but also the unspoken tension that had been woven into the fabric of the day by his own internal struggle. As the evening wore on, Jonathan's thoughts circled back to the events of the earlier ceremony. The memory of that scar, vivid and indelible, was like a stubborn phantom that refused to be exorcised. It had shattered the veneer of his carefully constructed world, leaving behind a raw wound that throbbed with the weight of lost time and unspoken regrets. The more he tried to bury the memory beneath polite conversation and forced smiles, the more it resurfaced, haunting him in the midst of laughter and light-hearted chatter. Despite his inner conflict, Jonathan felt an increasing need to maintain his distance from both Michael and the bride. Their closeness, the unguarded affection in their glances, and the gentle laughter they shared, served as a painful reminder of the intimacy he had once known and lost. The reception, with its swirling mix of celebration and sorrow, left him teetering on the edge of an emotional precipice. Every passing moment brought him closer to a confrontation with the truth he had long avoided. As he excused himself from yet another polite conversation, he retreated further into himself, the cacophony of voices and clinking glasses dissolving into a distant, indifferent murmur. In that space between conviviality and isolation, Jonathan was left to wrestle with a profound, unspoken question. Could he face the woman whose mark had dredged up the ghosts of his past? The awkwardness of the reception was not solely due to his own internal strife. It was a tangible reflection of the chasm that had grown between him and the life he once believed he understood. With every reluctant step he took away from the center of the celebration, Jonathan edged closer to a confrontation with his own history, a history that was now inextricably linked to the scar he could not forget. As the night deepened and the reception's festivities reached a fevered pitch, Jonathan found himself drawn away from the crowded dance floor and convivial chatter. The ornate hall, resplendent with candlelight and soft music, began to feel suffocating, an echo chamber for the emotions he'd been desperately trying to ignore. In a moment of quiet rebellion against the swirling uncertainty inside him, he excused himself and slipped out through a side door that led to a secluded terrace. Outside, the cool night air offered a stark contrast to the warm, oppressive atmosphere of the reception. The terrace was modest compared to the grandeur of the hall, yet it possessed a serene beauty of its own. A scattering of potted plants, a low stone bench, and the gentle hum of nocturnal insects blending with the distant sound of laughter. Jonathan paused at the threshold, inhaling the crisp air as he tried to steady his tumultuous thoughts. The memory of the scar, the one that had jolted him into an emotional maelstrom, was still vivid in his mind, and he felt compelled to seek answers in the quiet solitude of the night. Before he could fully collect his thoughts, a soft rustle in the shadows drew his attention. He turned to see a solitary figure moving toward the door, a graceful presence that seemed at once both tentative and determined. As the figure drew closer, Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. It was her, the woman whose visage had haunted him all evening. Emily. Despite the alterations in her appearance, there was an unmistakable quality in the tilt of her chin, in the quiet strength of her gaze, that stirred a deep, conflicted recognition within him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy with years of unsaid words, of painful memories and lingering questions. Emily's eyes, reflecting the faint light of the moon, held neither the defiant coolness he remembered from their last encounter nor the unguarded vulnerability of days gone by. Instead, they were resolute, a quiet admission that time had transformed them both in irrevocable ways. Jonathan's heart pounded as he finally broke the silence, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Emily." The sound of her name on his lips was a tentative invocation of a past he had tried so hard to escape. For a moment, she merely regarded him, her expression unreadable in the soft glow of the terrace lights. Then, as if summoning a long-dormant courage, she stepped closer, her presence a mixture of both familiarity and estrangement. In the hushed intimacy of that moonlit space, Jonathan felt the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the present converge. His mind raced with questions. Why had she appeared here? Had she come to offer an explanation for her sudden disappearance? Or was this encounter merely another twist in a narrative that he could scarcely comprehend? Emily's silence was a testament to the complexity of the moment. It was as if every step she took carried with it years of regret and unspoken sorrow. Unable to resist the pull of his own curiosity and longing, Jonathan reached out as if to bridge the distance between them. "I've wondered for so long. Why did you leave?" he asked, his voice trembling with vulnerability. The question hung in the cool air, charged with the weight of lost time and desperate hope for understanding. Emily's eyes softened for a heartbeat before hardening with resolve. There was a fleeting hesitation, a pause that seemed to stretch into an eternity, before she finally spoke, a voice low and measured, imbued with both sorrow and the quiet dignity of someone who had borne a heavy secret. Her reply, measured yet laden with emotion, hinted at a truth that would soon upend everything Jonathan believed about the past. And in that brief, charged exchange beneath the starry sky, both understood that their lives, once irrevocably intertwined and then painfully separated, were on the verge of converging once again, with consequences neither could yet foresee. Under the shimmering light of a solitary moon, Jonathan and Emily stood on that secluded terrace, the cool air accentuating the gravity of their reunion. Jonathan's pulse thundered in his ears as he mustered the courage to break the pregnant silence. "Is it really you?" he asked softly, each word laden with disbelief and a tentative hope that defied the years of separation. For a long moment, Emily merely regarded him with eyes that seemed to contain a lifetime of unshed tears and silent confessions. Then, as if deciding that the truth could no longer be deferred, she closed her eyes briefly, an almost imperceptible gesture that signaled both regret and resolution. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled like a fragile melody in the night. "I was pregnant when I left," she murmured, the words falling between them with a gravity that shattered the fragile calm. Jonathan's world, already teetering on the edge of the impossible, tilted in a way he had never experienced before. The revelation struck him like a bolt of lightning, an unexpected truth that rewrote the narrative of the past he thought he understood. In that instant, the years of silence, the unanswered questions, and the painful ambiguity of her departure cascaded through his mind. He staggered back, his heart pounding as memories collided. The quiet mornings when he'd awake with a sense of loss he couldn't quite name, the desperate hope that she might someday return, and the lingering question of what might have been if she had never disappeared. Now, the revelation that she had been carrying a secret, one that would have altered the course of both their lives, left him reeling with shock and disbelief. Emily's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and her tone, though soft, carried the weight of decisions made in the silence of despair. "I never meant to hurt you," she continued, her words a trembling confession of guilt and regret. I thought it was the only way for both of us. I was overwhelmed, and I couldn't face the consequences. I had to choose, for both your sake and mine." Each syllable resonated in the still night air, a poignant admission that bridged the gap between the past and the present. Jonathan felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted, leaving him suspended in a realm of raw, unfiltered emotion. The revelation forced him to confront the intricate tapestry of their shared history, the tender moments of intimacy, the quiet promises, and the dreams they had once woven together in the fragile hope of a future unmarred by loss. Now, every memory was tinged with a bittersweet clarity. It wasn't just that she had left. It was that she had carried with her a secret so profound that it altered the very fabric of their connection. The idea that their lives had been irrevocably changed by the silent burden of a hidden pregnancy filled him with a tumult of conflicting emotions: sorrow for what was lost, anger for the choices made without him, and a tentative, fragile hope that perhaps understanding this truth might pave the way for healing. In the stillness of that moonlit terrace, the world around them faded into insignificance. Jonathan searched Emily's face for answers, for any sign that this revelation was not a final, irrevocable break, but a step toward an uncertain reconciliation. The cool night air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and distant jasmine, bore witness to the collision of past and present. Jonathan's voice, when it finally emerged, was thick with emotion. All these years, I never knew. How could you decide for both of us without ever giving me a chance to choose? His words trembled with the weight of countless unanswered questions, echoing the pain of a love that had been silently dismantled. Emily's gaze fell, and in that moment, the distance between them seemed insurmountable. Yet, beneath the sorrow and regret, there was a glimmer of resolve, a fragile acknowledgement that the truth, as painful as it was, might be the first step toward mending what had long been shattered. As the night wore on, the silence between them grew, punctuated only by the distant hum of the celebration inside. And though the truth had been revealed, its full impact had yet to sink in. In that delicate balance between despair and the possibility of redemption, Jonathan realized that nothing would ever be the same again. Standing together on the quiet terrace, the enormity of Emily's revelation weighed heavily on both of them. Jonathan struggled to steady his voice as he reached out, as if to physically bridge the gap that had widened between them by years of unspoken pain. "Tell me everything," he implored, his tone a blend of anguish and determination. The cool night air carried his words into the shadows, where Emily hesitated only for a heartbeat before surrendering to the flood of memories that had haunted her for so long. Her confession began slowly, as if each word were a carefully measured act of self-exposure. "When I left, I was drowning," she admitted, her eyes glistening with tears that spoke of long-held regret. "I felt trapped by the weight of my own secrets, and I believed that disappearing was the only way to protect us both. I carried our child without knowing how to tell you, and I was terrified of the consequences. I made the choice alone because I thought it was the right thing to do, although I realize now it was a decision made out of fear, not love." Her voice wavered as she continued, describing the tumultuous period after she'd left, the isolation, and the crushing guilt that had haunted every day since. Jonathan listened in a stunned silence, the quiet hum of the distant reception fading into insignificance as her words etched themselves into his memory. Every detail of her confession, her trembling admissions, the raw sincerity in her tone, brought back flashes of moments they had once shared, whispered dreams in the dark, promises made under starlight, and a future they had dared to envision together. And yet, all of that had been abruptly severed by the choices made in the name of protection, leaving him to grapple with a legacy of pain and unanswered questions. "I spent so many years trying to understand why you left," Jonathan finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "I believed it was my fault, that I wasn't enough to keep you from disappearing. And now, to learn that you carried a secret so heavy, I'm overwhelmed by the realization that I never had a say in our destiny." His words were not an accusation, but a raw expression of hurt, a testament to the trust that had been broken and the life that had unraveled in his absence. Emily's eyes shimmered with remorse as she took a tentative step closer. "I was scared," she whispered, as if confessing a shame too deep to bear. "Every day, I felt the pressure of a secret I couldn't share, and I believed that by leaving, I was sparing you the pain of my mistakes. I thought I was choosing what was best for both of us, but I now see that in trying to protect you, I robbed you of the chance to decide for yourself." Her confession spilled out in a torrent of regret and sorrow, each word laden with the burden of a decision that had irrevocably altered their lives. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft rustle of leaves in the night breeze and the distant murmur of life continuing unabated beyond the terrace's edge. Jonathan's heart ached with the realization that the love they had once shared had been overshadowed by the painful necessity of choices made in isolation. Yet, amid the sorrow, there flickered a small ember of hope, a possibility that by facing this painful truth, they might begin to heal the wounds of the past. In that quiet, vulnerable space between them, Emily's confession was not just an explanation. It was an appeal for understanding, for forgiveness, and perhaps for a second chance at a future they had both longed for in silence. As the night deepened, the raw emotions between them wove a tentative bridge over the chasm of years, one built on shared pain and the unspoken promise that, no matter how heavy the truth, the possibility of redemption might still lie ahead. In the days following the tearful confession on the moonlit terrace, Jonathan found himself haunted by the relentless echoes of the past. The revelation of Emily's secret had stirred a melee of emotions that he had long tried to suppress: anger, sorrow, regret, and a desperate yearning for closure. With every waking moment, memories of the life they once imagined together flashed before him like scenes from an old film, each frame a painful reminder of what had been lost. Determined that the truth could no longer remain locked away in the corridors of memory, Jonathan resolved to confront the past head-on, no matter how painful it might be. He sought out the quiet corners of the city, revisiting places where echoes of their shared history lingered. Every familiar street, every whispered echo of laughter in a long-forgotten cafe, carried with it the weight of decisions made in youthful haste. In these solitary journeys, Jonathan began to piece together the fragmented timeline of their lives, a tapestry woven with moments of tender intimacy, promises spoken in hushed tones, and the painful chasm that had grown between them when Emily had left without warning. With each recollection, the question that had festered in his heart, the question of whether he could ever forgive her, became more urgent. One rain-drenched evening, as the city lights blurred through the drizzle, Jonathan found himself standing before a modest, familiar building that once had been a sanctuary of shared dreams. The memory of a time when he and Emily had planned their future together surged forth with a clarity that was both beautiful and excruciating. In that moment, the confrontation with the past was no longer a choice, but a necessity. He could no longer hide behind the veneer of professional detachment, nor could he continue to nurse the wounds that had festered in isolation. Returning to the place where their lives had once intersected so vibrantly, Jonathan's voice, when it finally emerged, was raw with emotion. "You decided for me," he said, the words a bitter acknowledgement of a choice made without his consent. In the quiet solitude of that rain-soaked night, his words hung in the air, heavy with accusation and sorrow. It was not a confrontation born of anger alone, but a plea for understanding, a desperate desire to reclaim the fragments of a life that had been shattered by secrets and silence. As the confrontation unfolded in a solitary dialogue with his own memories, Jonathan's inner turmoil reached a crescendo. The passion of youthful love had long since been replaced by a storm of unresolved feelings, each one demanding recognition. And though the conversation was silent, the echoes of his words reverberated through the corridors of his mind. In that tumultuous interplay of regret and resolve, Jonathan realized that the past was not something he could simply outrun. It was an inseparable part of him, a mosaic of pain, joy, and the inevitable acceptance that forgiveness, if it were ever to be granted, would have to emerge from the raw honesty of confronting what had been. Standing alone beneath the weeping sky, Jonathan vowed that the truth would no longer be confined to the shadows. The confrontation with his own past was the first step toward understanding not just the choices made by Emily, but also the parts of himself that had been left behind in the wake of their separation. And as the rain washed away the traces of old sorrows, he clung to the hope that in facing the painful memories, he might finally discover a path to healing, a path that, however uncertain, offered the promise of renewal and the possibility of a future unburdened by the ghosts of yesterday. In the quiet aftermath of that fateful confrontation with the past, Jonathan found himself standing at a crossroads of emotion and memory. The relentless storm of revelations had slowed to a heavy, introspective silence, a silence in which the echoes of lost love and betrayal mingled with a glimmer of tentative hope. For hours, he sat alone in the dim light of his study, surrounded by relics of a life that once promised connection, and pondered the gravity of forgiveness. Every thought, every heartbeat, was a reminder of how deeply he had been wounded by the choices made without his consent. The silence was not empty, however. In the depths of that stillness, Jonathan began to see fragments of something new emerging, a quiet understanding that the past, as painful as it was, need not forever dictate the contours of his future. With each passing moment, the anger that had once burned so fiercely softened, replaced by an unexpected tenderness that bordered on sorrowful acceptance. It was as if the weight of old betrayals was gradually yielding to the realization that to move forward, he would have to embrace not only the pain, but also the possibility of redemption. In that reflective solitude, Jonathan's mind replayed the image of Emily's vulnerable eyes on that moonlit terrace, a silent testament to the fact that behind every scar, every decision made in fear, lay a human heart burdened by imperfection. Though he felt betrayed by her secret, he also recognized that she, too, had been a victim of circumstance, a casualty of choices made in the name of protection. The paradox of their shared past was laid bare. Two souls intertwined by love and separated by circumstance, each bearing wounds that time had failed to heal completely. As the hours turned to dawn, Jonathan made a decision in silence, a decision that required neither words nor grand declarations, but a quiet commitment to accepting the truth as it was. He resolved that forgiveness was not a single act, but a process, a journey of understanding and gradual healing. In the muted light of early morning, as the first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon, he finally accepted that the past, with all its anguish and beauty, was an inseparable part of him. The silence, once a barren void of unspoken resentment, had transformed into a gentle lullaby of introspection and resolve. There, in that sacred moment of clarity, Jonathan chose to let go of the searing anger that had long imprisoned him. He recognized that the scars of betrayal and loss could, in time, become the very markers of survival and growth. The silent decision was not a full absolution of the hurt he had suffered. It was, rather, an acknowledgement that the past, however painful, could serve as a foundation for a future built on empathy, trust, and the fragile hope of reconciliation. In the stillness of that transformative dawn, Jonathan understood that every scar told a story of mistakes, of missed opportunities, and of the hard-won lessons that only time can teach. With a deep, measured breath, he embraced the truth that forgiveness might never erase the pain, but it could light a path forward, a path where vulnerability was not weakness, but a testament to the resilience of the human heart. And so, with that silent, resolute decision echoing in his soul, Jonathan prepared himself for the next chapter, a chapter where the burden of the past would no longer hold him captive, and where the possibility of love, however uncertain, beckoned on the horizon. The following afternoon, with the taste of a new dawn still lingering in his mind, Jonathan realized that the burden of this truth could no longer be borne in silence. Michael, his longtime friend and the newly engaged groom, deserved to know the reality that had been weighing on Jonathan's heart. The decision to confront Michael was fraught with trepidation. After all, their friendship had been a pillar of his life. Yet, the need for honesty, no matter how painful, outweighed his reluctance. Jonathan sought out Michael in the quiet corridors of the grand estate, where the echoes of the previous night's revelry had given way to a hushed calm. Michael was seated alone in a corner of a sunlit veranda, his face a mixture of exhaustion and lingering joy from the celebration. As Jonathan approached, the tension in the air became palpable, a silent prelude to a conversation that neither man had anticipated. "Michael," Jonathan began, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions roiling within him. "There's something I need to tell you, a truth that I've been carrying since last night." Michael's eyes, warm and inquisitive, regarded him with a mixture of concern and curiosity. For a moment, the world around them seemed to recede, leaving only the two of them suspended in an uneasy silence. Jonathan took a deep breath and recounted the events as he had experienced them, the mysterious invitation, the wedding, and, most painfully, the realization that the bride bore a mark that linked her to his past with Emily. He described the moments of recognition, the haunting memory of the scar, and the anguished encounter on the terrace. Every word was imbued with raw vulnerability, a stark contrast to the measured detachment that had once defined him. As the gravity of Jonathan's confession sank in, Michael's face transformed from one of confusion to a profound mixture of disbelief and hurt. His eyes widened as he absorbed the implications that the woman he was about to marry was, in some inexplicable way, connected to a part of Jonathan's past, a past that Jonathan had only recently allowed himself to confront. Michael's voice, when it emerged, was tinged with sorrow and betrayal. "How could you have kept this from me?" he demanded, the hurt clear in every syllable. "I trusted you, and now I feel like nothing is as it seems." The confrontation that unfolded was charged with raw emotion. Jonathan's explanations, though sincere, did little to mollify the sense of betrayal that Michael felt. There were no grand gestures of apology, only a grim acknowledgement that the tangled web of secrets and unspoken truths had come crashing down at a moment when Michael least expected it. Jonathan pleaded that he had never intended to cause harm, that the truth had been an agonizing burden he had struggled with alone. But Michael's hurt ran deep, a betrayal not just of trust, but of the sanctity of their lifelong friendship. In the tense exchange, Michael's words cut through the air like shards of glass. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he said quietly, his voice cracking under the weight of his disillusionment. The conversation, once filled with the hope of reconciliation, now teetered on the edge of irreversible fracture. Jonathan's heart ached as he realized that the revelation of the past had not only altered his own life, but was now threatening to dismantle the bond he had shared with Michael for decades. For what felt like an eternity, the two friends stood in a fragile stalemate, a moment suspended between anger and the desperate longing for understanding. Jonathan's eyes pleaded for forgiveness, while Michael's gaze oscillated between disbelief and a deep, painful sorrow. Finally, as the conversation reached an impasse, Michael turned away, unable to bear the weight of the truth any longer. His retreat was not just physical. It was the first visible sign of the chasm that had been carved by secrets and betrayal. In that charged moment of parting, Jonathan was left with the stark reality that some truths, however necessary, can shatter even the strongest of bonds. Michael's silence was a poignant reminder that while the past may be confronted, its scars often run deeper than words can express. And as the veranda fell back into quiet solitude, Jonathan knew that the road ahead would be one marked not only by the struggle to mend broken trust, but by the relentless pursuit of a future unburdened by the ghosts of yesterday. In the wake of that painful confrontation, the days that followed were shrouded in an uneasy quiet, a period where the echoes of the past and the raw wounds of betrayal seemed to demand space for healing. Jonathan spent long hours wandering through quiet streets and sunlit parks, grappling with the realization that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The revelations, confessions, and confrontations had left him standing at the threshold of an uncertain future, one that was as full of potential as it was weighed down by old regrets. But amid the lingering sorrow, there emerged a subtle, almost imperceptible shift within him. In the quiet moments of solitude that replaced the cacophony of unanswered questions, Jonathan began to see that the scars of the past, though deep and unyielding, could also serve as the roadmap for a more authentic future. The betrayal he had felt was still raw, yet he could no longer ignore the tender vulnerability that had been laid bare in his confrontation with Emily and Michael. It was a vulnerability that spoke of the possibility of forgiveness, a promise that even the deepest wounds might, over time, give way to healing. One late afternoon, as the golden light of a waning sun spilled over the city, Jonathan sought out Emily once more. In a quiet cafe tucked away from the bustle of everyday life, they sat facing each other across a small table, the soft murmur of conversation around them providing a gentle counterpoint to the intensity of their shared silence. Emily's eyes, filled with a mixture of regret and cautious hope, met his as if silently pleading for a second chance. In that moment, the past, with all its shattered dreams and missed opportunities, seemed to recede into the background, replaced by a tentative promise of renewal. Their conversation was measured and deliberate. There were no grand declarations or promises of a return to what once was. Instead, they spoke of the need to move forward, to accept that life is a tapestry woven from both light and shadow. Jonathan admitted the depth of his hurt, the sting of betrayal that had cut so deeply. Yet, in the same breath, he acknowledged the softening of his anger, a slow but undeniable thawing of the ice that had long encased his heart. Emily, in turn, offered her own quiet remorse, explaining once more how fear, and overwhelming circumstances had driven her to make decisions that, in hindsight, were as tragic as they were unavoidable. In that heartfelt exchange, the two found a fragile common ground. They agreed that the path ahead would be uncertain and fraught with challenges, yet they also recognized that the past need not be an anchor weighing them down. Instead, it could become a catalyst for growth, a reminder that every scar, every painful memory, was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Jonathan realized that while he might never fully forget the betrayals and losses that had marked his journey, he could choose to let those experiences guide him toward a future defined not by bitterness, but by the quiet strength of forgiveness. As the evening gave way to night, the conversation slowly tapered off into a comfortable silence, one that spoke volumes of the tentative hope burgeoning between them. Jonathan knew that rebuilding trust would be a long, arduous process, one that would require patience, vulnerability, and a willingness to confront the ghosts of the past without letting them dictate the future. Yet, as he looked into Emily's eyes, he felt a stirring of something he had long thought lost, the possibility of love reborn from the ashes of regret. In that final, reflective moment, Jonathan embraced the uncertainty of what lay ahead. He understood that moving forward would require not only the courage to forgive, but also the humility to accept that the future, though uncertain, held the promise of new beginnings. With a quiet determination, he resolved to forge a path that honored both the pain of the past and the delicate hope for tomorrow, a path where the wounds of yesterday could, in time, heal into the gentle reminders of a life well lived. And so, as the night wrapped the city in its soft, embracing darkness, Jonathan stepped out of the cafe with a heart lighter than it had been in years. The scars of the past would always remain, but they would no longer define him. Instead, they would serve as the quiet witnesses to a journey of redemption, a journey that, despite all its heartbreak, promised the chance for a future built on understanding, compassion, and the transformative power of forgiveness. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your support helps us create more captivating stories for you. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next story.